I met Peter Gray thanks to a colleague, a parent whose young people have been enrolled in the program that I'll be talking to you a little bit about, who found his blog on Psychology Today's site, which I trust many of you have enjoyed already, and if you haven't, highly recommend it. And I started reading about this kind of crazy guy, and felt pleasantly stretched by him. More about that later. But have had the good fortune of having several extended conversations with him each time I drive up from Philadelphia. I stay with Peter when we have our tipping point cell meetings. And he, as you may know already, started out studying rats. And, no, Kevin, I'm not referring to now. And then through family circumstances, which, I don't know, Peter, are you going to tell that story? I won't correct you.
I'm not planning to.
If he doesn't, you can read about it very entertainingly at the beginning of his book. But his son brought him into the world of young people and learning and schooling and play and such. His personal story in that regard is very interesting, and now he's a world authority on this stuff. So, again, without taking up any more of the speaker's time, let me turn this over to Dr. Peter Gray, and enjoy.
Thank you. I guess everybody has the handout here. The handout just gives, on the front page, an outline of what I'm talking about. And on the back page, it gives references, including the reference to my book, where I document all the things that I'll be talking about today and much more. But I also give references to academic articles. I'm going to be making a number of claims in this talk. And I personally always get frustrated when people make claims and I can't go and check them out. So I wanted to be sure that you at least have the option of checking these things out, looking what's the evidence for the things that I'm going to be talking about. The thesis of my talk, can everybody hear me? I can't even tell if this thing is working. Everybody can hear me in the back, okay? You're a little louder? Okay. I don't know if this works. I'm not sure that this thing is working.
That's the mic you want to talk into.
This is the mic I want to talk into, yeah. So the thesis of my talk is that play is the natural way that children educate themselves. Play came about in the course of evolution because it serves the function of education. The first person to propose this thesis, interestingly, was somebody who was writing not too long after Darwin. He was one of the few people who really understood Darwin and began to apply it to human behavior. And that's Karl Gruss, the philosopher and naturalist, German philosopher and naturalist Karl Gruss. Wrote a book in 1898 entitled The Play of Animals, in which he made the case that all mammals play and when they're young, and the reason they play is because mammals, unlike fish and reptiles and so forth, need to learn a lot. They come into the world without instincts that are so rigid and fixed that they can survive on the basis of instincts. They have to practice the skills that they need to develop. And so he pointed out that young predators play at prey. They play, everybody who's got a cat or kitten, they're playing at predation. And if you've ever watched a kitten playing at preying on a mouse, that's, it captures the mouse and then lets the mouse go and captures it again, and this is the way young predators play, one of the ways that young predators play. Animals like colts, zebra colts, or young gazelle and so forth, which are preyed upon by lions and such, play at fleeing and dodging. You can pretty much predict what a mammal will play at by knowing what are the skills that this animal has to develop in order to survive and thrive with its way of life. Well, this book, I might say, is quite well accepted. Animal behaviorists who study play pretty much accept this hypothesis, and that's kind of been the working hypothesis for studies of animal play. Interestingly, Groos wrote another book, which is out of print, largely neglected, called The Play of Man, published just a few years later in 1901. In The Play of Man, he said that the human animal also plays. In fact, children, when they're free to play, he pointed out, play more than any other mammals, the young of any other mammals do. And precisely in line with the theory that he had presented in his book on the play of animals, this is because they have the most to learn. And so it's not surprising that they would be even more motivated to play and would play for many more years than the young of other animals, because there's so much to learn. He also pointed out that humans, unlike other species, need to learn the particular skills of the culture in which they're developing. They don't have to just learn the species-specific skills that apply to all humans everywhere, like two-legged walking. They need to learn the particular skills that are unique to their culture. So he said there's an addition to understand play in the human being, and this addition is that we have to recognize that children are biologically designed to look around them and see what it is that older people do. What is it that you have to learn in order to become an adult in your culture? And children incorporate that into their play. That was his basic hypothesis. And this book was panned by Piaget, who did not understand Darwin's theory of evolution. And it has been pretty much neglected by psychologists ever since. But it's Groos's book, The Play of Man, on which I have built my own course of research. And so I would like to talk about research that I've been involved in and that some of my students have been involved in that really stands on the shoulders of Carl Groos. What is it, why is it that children everywhere in the world are so motivated to play? This is what they want to do, and they especially want to play with other kids, and they want to play with other kids away from adults. They don't want to play directed by adults. In fact, I'm not going to spend a lot of time today defining play, but if I were talking primarily about play itself, about the definition of play, I would point out that when it's directed by adults, it's not really play. Play, by definition, is something that's self-directed, directed by the players themselves. So one way in which I've attempted to test and in some ways build upon Groos's theory has been to look at play in hunter-gatherer cultures. Now, until a mere 10 or 11,000 years ago, we were all hunter-gatherers. In our genes, we're all hunter-gatherers. There's been very little biological evolution since then. There are some peoples in various isolated parts of the world who've managed to survive as hunter-gatherers into relatively modern times, certainly into the last half of the 20th century. And there were many anthropologists who trekked out into remote parts of the world to find these people who were living relatively isolated from the modern world, continuing the traditions that may have gone back for thousands, tens of thousands of years. And so one thing I've done is I've read everything that I can find written about children's lives in such cultures. I might say that there are about 36 such cultures that have been found in Africa, in South America, in parts of Asia, in the New Zealand, in Australia, various parts of the world, some in deserts, some in jungles, some up north of some of the Inuit groups, some in more often in hot climates. Regardless of where these people are found, there are certain similarities among them. They live in small bands of typically between 25 and 50 people per band, including children. Each band is autonomously governing. Within the band, there is complete sharing, and people even share across bands. They all have friends and relatives in other bands nearby. Their highest moral values are sharing, cooperation, egalitarian values. They do not have chiefs. When people talk about tribes with chiefs, they're not talking about hunter-gatherers. They do not have big men. They make their decisions by consensus. They have strong beliefs about individual autonomy. They expect people to share, and if you didn't share, you would be ridiculed in one way or another. But they don't tell people what to do. They simply don't tell people what to do. There are no bosses. There's nobody who's the leader of a hunting trip. The group going out hunting or going out gathering, they make their decisions among themselves how to do it. There's no requirement that you go out hunting or gathering. It's totally up to you. You have to make your own decision. Now, what is fascinating is not only do they not tell one another what to do among the adults, but they don't tell the kids what to do. This belief that you don't tell people what to do, that people make their own decisions, that each person is autonomous, that people will do the right thing if you let them do it, this pervades the hunter-gatherer culture to an extent that even though I went into this study kind of hoping that was what I would find, that's what, I was amazed at the degree to which this seemed to apply. Let me just to give you a few examples of what people said about child raising, partly on our questionnaire. Some of this comes from the written literature. Let me just read 4 quotations, each from a different observer of a different hunter-gatherer group. So here's one. Hunter-gatherers do not give orders to their children. For example, no adult announces bedtime. At night, children remain around adults until they feel tired and fall asleep. Adults do not interfere with their children's lives. They never beat, scold, or behave aggressively with them, physically or verbally, nor do they offer praise or keep track of their development. This is Yumi Goso of South America, who's talking. She's studied this group called the Paracana in the Amazon, but she's talking generally based on a review of hunter-gatherers that she's written. Here's another one. The idea that this is my child or your child does not exist. Deciding what another person should do, no matter what his age, is outside the Yucwana vocabulary of behaviors. There is great interest in what everyone does, but no impulse to influence, let alone coerce anyone. The child's will is his motive force. Here's another one by yet a different observer of a different group. Infants and young children are allowed to explore their environment to the limits of their physical capacities and with minimal interference from adults. Thus, if a child picks up a hazardous object, parents generally leave it to explore the dangers on its own. The child is presumed to know what it is doing. I've seen films by one of my anthropologist friends who studied a hunter-gatherer group called the Efe, films of toddlers, 2 years old, playing with machetes, playing with fire, parents, adults back in the gun, unconcerned. Says occasionally somebody gets burned or somebody gets cut, but you know, that happens, that's life. And their belief is that how are children going to learn to use these tools and things that they have to learn how to use? How are they going to overcome the fear of it? How are they going to, if they can't play with it? So of course they let them play. The kids have to play with the tools of their culture in their view. And if a kid, they believe that if a kid goes and picks something up, the kid knows what he's doing. You know, if this is the way we survived, if kids really didn't know what they were doing, our species would not exist, right? Children, here's another one. Children very rarely cried, probably because they had little to cry about. No child was ever yelled at or slapped or physically punished, and few were even scolded. Most never heard a discouraging word until they were approaching adolescence, and even then the reprimand, if it really was a reprimand, was delivered in a soft voice. This is Elizabeth Marshall Thomas, who studied a group that she calls the Juwansi. Others have called them the Kong. she claims that they prefer to be called the Chuansi. She was among those who first found this group and studied them when they were in their most pristine state. They are now the most fully studied of hunter-gatherer groups. But she was studying them at the earliest time in the sort of middle of the 20th century. And she was among the first to write about the amazing difference to her between the attitudes that adults have towards kids in that culture versus the attitude that adults have towards kids in our culture. The degree to which they're trusting of children, trusting of their instincts, trusting of their judgment. Thomas went on to write this is a book that I would recommend anybody who's interested in hunter-gatherers, called The Old Way, just written a few years ago, really. We are sometimes told that children who are treated so kindly become spoiled. But this is because those who hold that opinion have no idea how successful such measures can be. Free from frustration or anxiety, sunny and cooperative, the children were every parent's dream. No culture can ever have raised better, more intelligent, more likable, more confident children. You know, if it was just her saying this, I would think she was looking through rose-colored glasses, that she was romanticizing, and so on. But I've heard these kinds of things from so many different anthropologists, males as well as females, political conservatives as well as liberals, people from different, always commenting on how terrific the children are, how non-fussy they are, how they solve their own problems, how they're not afraid of adults, how they're willful and confident, but self-directed, self-controlled in an amazing way. I hear these stories from everyone. One of my colleagues, I asked one of my colleagues who's an anthropologist what whining is like in the culture that she said. I asked her that because a graduate student who had heard me give a talk came up and told me afterwards she was studying whining and she had a universal theory of whining. And so she wondered what whining was like in hunter-gatherer cultures. Did it fit with her theory of... So I asked my colleague, what does whining sound like? And she said, she had to stop and think. She said, you know, I lived with this group for months. I never, ever heard a child whine. So, and this was not the same person who I've just quoted here. And I've heard these kinds of things from so many different people. All right, so this gives you an idea of the way children are treated in these hunter-gatherer cultures. And again, it's not just one culture. It's not 5 cultures. It's every single one of these banned hunter-gatherer cultures that have been studied. This seems to be universal among people who have lived in that way. The second, a graduate student of mine some years ago did a survey in which we surveyed 10 different anthropologists who among them had lived in 7 different hunter-gatherer groups on 3 different continents. And we asked them questions about children's lives and the relationship between children and adults, how children learn the skills that they needed to learn. One of the things that we found in this study was, one of our questions was, how much time did children have for play? How much time were they free to play? And the answer we got from every single one of these 10 anthropologists was essentially this: all the time. All the time, from dawn to dusk. From the age of 4, when they are considered to have enough reason that they can leave the sides of their parents or their other adults and go out with the other kids, until their mid to late teens, when they begin to take on some adult responsibilities. Quite natural. Nobody's telling them they have to, but they begin to take on. Their play hunting begins to become real hunting when they're kind of in their mid to late teens. Their play gathering becomes real gathering at some point. Complete freedom to play and explore on their own all the time. There's no concept in these groups that children need to be taught by adults. There's no concept that adults have to monitor the kids' learning. There's this complete confidence, reinforced presumably by millennia of experience, that children who are trusted, who are allowed to play and explore on their own, will learn what they need to learn. And they need to learn a lot. I'm not going to go into detail about that. They need to learn a lot. These are rich cultures. They have music, they have dances, they have hunting is an extraordinarily skilled activity. They have to be able to identify maybe 200 or 300 different species of animals that they hunt or that are relevant to their hunting. They have to know how to identify their tracks. Tracking is an extraordinarily complex skill. So there's an enormous amount that they have to learn. And they learn it entirely on their own through play. Nobody gives them a class in how to track. Nobody sits them down and says that you have to do this or that, or you'll never grow up to be a hunter or a gatherer or somebody who can do the things that are essential to the culture. It just doesn't happen. If you ask adults there how children in these cultures, how children learn, they'll say they look around, they see, they observe, and then they go and do it in their play. And they learn by observing, exploring, and by playing. That's the, if you will, that's the educational philosophy of the hunter-gatherer. We also asked them, well, what are the things that you observe kids playing at? What are some of the things that they played at? And so here's just a collection of some of the things that I jotted down from these questionnaires. Consistent with Gruss's theory, it's not surprising to me to find that much of what the children played at were the very kinds of skills that were important to survival, to sustenance activities in their culture. So here's just a partial list: digging up tubers, fishing, smoking porcupines out of holes, cooking, caring for infants, climbing trees, building vine ladders, building huts, using knives and other tools, making tools, carrying heavy loads, building rafts, making fires, defending against attacks from predators, imitating animals, which is a means of learning to identify animals and learning their habits, making music, making musical instruments, dancing, storytelling, and arguing were all mentioned by one or more respondents. Interesting, quite a number of them talked about arguing, that the kids would actually, in some of these cultures, the kids build their own little play village. The people are mobile. They move from camp to camp. In every camp, they set up sort of huts that they live in. And the kids often set up their own little miniature village of huts that they've built. And they go off and play there away from adults. And some of the anthropologists have reported that what they see there is the kids literally reenacting the arguments that they've heard adults make the night before, to see if they can improve upon the arguments. So, and they will make fun of any adult who's an idiot in the arguments or who gets unduly angry. They will mimic that. They will mock that adult in their play. They are commenting amongst themselves, reinforcing what seems to work, what was stupid and ridiculous. So of course they're playing away from adults because that makes them completely free to reenact and ridicule what they see as the bad part of the adult life, as well as to try to replicate and maybe even improve upon what they see as the good part of adult life. So in some, well, I should also mention that all of these cultures said, all of these anthropologists said that the boys in the culture they observed spent simply endless hours at tracking and hunting, playful tracking. They all make little, if it's a group that hunts with bows and arrows, they make little bows and arrows for themselves, and they go hunting with them, and they track one another, they learn to track game. Tracking is an extraordinarily difficult skill. They all realize how important it is. They all are thrilled to be playing at these kinds of activities. In the one culture, in the group that we studied, where women also hunt, the little girls also played right along with the boys at hunting, just as much as the boys did, apparently. In most of these cultures, the men hunt and the women do more of the gathering, although men also gather. And so the girls would often be playing at the thing. So if it's a culture, for example, there are some cultures where women do most of the fishing, so the girls would be playing at fishing. The things that both men and women do, like cooking, building huts, and so on, they play together at. So they seem to segregate by sex to the degree that there's a separation of sex in the adult activities of the culture. Okay, so that's hunter-gatherer cultures. The kids in hunter-gatherer cultures, just as Gruss suggested, are learning by observing, incorporating what they observe into their play, and becoming skilled through play. And then they go on in adult life still in the same playful spirit, but now the hunting is real hunting. They're bringing back serious amounts of game. The gathering is real gathering. The dances become the festival dancing of the group rather than simply purely play dancing, although it's hard to distinguish. The hunter-gatherers don't generally have a word separating play from work. So the adult activities are also very much in a playful mode. All right, what does this have to do with modern culture, with life in our culture? I mean, maybe you can learn hunter-gatherer kinds of things through play, but maybe you can't learn reading and writing and arithmetic and the other things that are important to our culture through play. So the other part of my research, my work, and some of my students' work that is relevant to Groos's theory is work that we've done, observations we've made at the Sudbury Valley School. Some of you I know very well know the Sudbury Valley School. This is a school that was founded in 1968. So it's been in existence now for 45 years. It's just about 20 miles west of here in Framingham, Massachusetts. This is a school where there are now about 140 children, students who range in age from 4, which incidentally is the age at which hunter-gatherers believe children have reached a sufficient judgment and maturity that they don't have to be watched by adults, from the age of 4 on through teenage years. So basically we're talking there about a group that's similar to the age range of a play group in a hunter-gatherer culture, although there are many more kids at the Sudbury Valley School than in a hunter-gatherer band. The school operates as a democracy. The decisions are made by the school meeting, where each person has one vote if they choose to use it. They come to the school meeting and hear the issues and vote on the issues. All the rules of the school are made through the school meeting. It's a school at which the rules are enforced through the judicial committee, which essentially consists of a selection of students who, such that over the course of time, everybody pretty much serves on the judicial committee, just as in our larger society we serve on a jury. Except it's usually done in such a way that there's always at least one little kid, one middle-sized kid, one big kid, and one staff member on it. So it's a representative sample of the group. So the school was set up to model the basic principles of democracy. It's kind of the town meeting sort of democracy mode of governance. The belief was that children who are growing up in a democracy where we have certain rights and responsibilities that go with those rights, if they are going to become effective democratic citizens, should grow up in a setting where those rights and responsibilities apply. So that was the basic idea of the school. The belief on the part of the founders of the school was that education would take care of itself. There was no need to think about education, except that there had to be the opportunities for people to educate themselves. So there has to be the tools of the culture available so that children can play with those tools, books available if people want to read, computers today available, experts in various areas that can be consulted if the children wish to consult with them. So there's a certain way in which you could look at this culture. I don't think the people who started the school had the intent of setting up something that was modeled after a hunter-gatherer band. But when I look at the school, the educational philosophy of the school, that children will learn through their own self-motivated efforts, through their own play and exploration, that's basically the hunter-gatherer model of education. Now it's interesting, my own first study of the school a long, long time ago was a follow-up study of the graduates, and since then the school itself has done a couple of large-scale follow-up studies of the graduates. So this school, in terms of the educational effectiveness, has been very well documented. My first study was done a long time ago when the school was smaller and there were about 100 people, maybe about 90 people who qualified as graduates by our definition of it and who had been out for at least 2 years. And we were able to identify almost all of them, and we followed them up, and we found that lo and behold, they had gone on to do well in life. They had gone on to, those who wanted to go to higher education, go to college, didn't seem to have any difficulty getting into college, even if they'd never studied a textbook before, never taken a course before, didn't seem to have any particular difficulty, and certainly didn't have any difficulty doing well in college once they were there. Many people chose not to go on to college, but they were people who were going into areas where the college degree is not required as a license for it, and they certainly didn't feel like they needed college to educate themselves. So generally people seemed to know what they were doing, more or less. Not everybody knew what they were doing when they first left the school, but generally seemed to know what they were doing and seemed to be able to do what they wanted to do. There didn't seem to be any path in life that had been cut out. There were people in business, there were people in academia, there were people in the helping professions, medicine people. And of course there were many musicians, and there were computer programmers and so on, the kinds of things that you might expect that kids would do, because kids tend to do that wherever they are, tend to like the arts and music, and they tend to get drawn into new technology and become very good at them. All of that occurred among the graduates. We also spent some time, I had one student, graduate student, who spent many, many days at the school making observations of how kids learn in that setting. And we've published work showing how age mixing is crucial to the learning in this setting. Younger kids are learning to read through interactions with older kids. They're learning all kinds of skills, from tree climbing to computer use to they're acquiring higher vocabularies and so on, because younger kids are interacting with older kids. Older kids are learning to be caring and nurturing and getting a sense of their maturity through their interactions with younger kids. So age mixing is absolute key to the functioning of this as a school, as an educational institution, as it is in hunter-gatherer cultures. Because the anthropologists will also talk about the kids are always playing in age-mixed groups. Even in the hunter-gatherer culture, even if they wanted to segregate by age, they couldn't, because there's not enough kids of the same age. Age segregation is entirely an artifact of our public school system, where we divide kids up by age. When kids play freely, they tend to gravitate, not surprisingly, to their own age. They want their best friends, or kids roughly their own age. But little kids love to be around big kids, and big kids love to give piggyback rides and be around, read to, care for little kids. This is part of human nature, and it's quite natural. I mean, if you're a teenager, it won't be that long before you may have kids yourself, and so it wouldn't be surprising that natural selection would endow you with a drive to want to play with little kids and learn about them and practice, in some sense, being a parent. So that's what happens at the school. Now, I want to point out I've listed 6 characteristics on this handout that you have that I'm calling these characteristics, I'm suggesting, represent the optimal context for self-education. These are characteristics that are present in a hunter-gatherer band, and they are also present at the Sudbury Valley School and other schools modeled after the Sudbury Valley School. So let me just state what these characteristics are and just a word or two about them. The first is the social expectation and reality that education is children's responsibility, where it's not just words, oh, your education is your responsibility. Every teacher might say that to the kids, which means it's your responsibility to do what I'm telling you to do. So, but here it truly is, because nobody's telling them what to do. Nobody's testing them. There's no sense on the part of any child that it's anybody else's job at all other than themselves to make sure that they learn. Under those conditions, and I'm suggesting those were the conditions that applied throughout human history before schools, our species would have been eliminated were it not for the fact that children have this extraordinary capacity, when it's clear that they have to take charge of their own education. There's nothing that's more important to them than that. And they do it largely through play. But they play in ways that lead them to learn what they need to learn to do well in the culture. So the social expectation, if the expectation is that your learning is somebody else's responsibility, you just have to do what they do, then you can develop a completely cynical view about it. I didn't succeed in life because I had lousy parents who didn't teach me. I had lousy teachers who didn't teach me. You develop a victim-like attitude. But if it's very clear that there's nobody responsible but you yourself, you can't become cynical. That's number one. Number two, unlimited freedom to play, explore, and pursue own interests. Not an hour a day, not 2 hours a day, not 5 hours a day, all day, morning to night. Time to get bored. Time to try this for a few months, and then try that for a few months. Unlimited, not recess. Play is not recess. It's not recreation. It's not time out from the serious matter of work. It is the life of the child. It is the route to education in a hunter-gatherer band and at the Sudbury Valley School. Third, opportunity to play with the tools of the culture. Play with the tools of the culture. Not just be exposed to the tools of the culture, not to be taught how to use the tools of the culture in some rote way, tested on whether you can use it, but to play with the tools of the culture. In a hunter-gatherer band, kids are playing with knives and fire and bows and arrows and blow darts and blowguns and snares and the kinds of tools of their culture and digging sticks. Sudbury Valley, no surprise, kids are playing with computers. That's the primary tool of our culture. And yet there are some parents who would deprive their child of opportunity to play with computers. It would be like a hunter-gatherer depriving their children of being able to play with bows and arrows or digging sticks. It's the primary tool of the culture, and every child recognizes it. So of course they want to play with computers. But they play also varyingly with kitchen equipment, they play with woodworking equipment, they play with sporting equipment of various kinds. There's various kinds of tools of the culture which the kids play with and get involved in, and they become good at using these tools. The fourth characteristic, access to a variety of caring adults who are helpers, not judges. In the hunter-gatherer band, most of the adults in the band are literally uncles and aunts of the kids. They love the kids, they care for the kids. There's no sense, by the way, that the kids belong to the parents any more than to anybody else in the band. The kids are kids of the band. In fact, the kids tend to be attracted to the parents, but if the parents are in a bad mood, the kids will just go and sleep with somebody else. You know, you can't. Somebody told me it would be impossible for a parent to discipline a child in a hunter-gatherer band because the child would be rescued by some other adult. You know, we talk about how grandparents spoil our kids because they don't discipline the way we would like to discipline. Well, triple that problem in the hunter-gatherer band. You know, nobody's going to let you hit your kids. Nobody would let you hit your kid. They would just simply say, you're in a bad mood, let your child sleep with me tonight, in my hut tonight. There are a variety of adults who all love and care for the kids, and they're not there to judge, they're not there to direct, but they are there to help if somebody asks for help. They're there for comfort, they're there, and the different adults have different abilities and personalities. It would be maladaptive if nature said to children, learn from your parents, because you might have bad parents. Throughout most of human history, most parents died before you reached a certain age. That would be maladaptive if kids beyond the age of 4 were just stuck on their parents. They're not. They want to learn from everybody, and they need to learn from everybody, and they need a variety of people. If they're going to learn the culture, they need to see what other adults are doing. They need to go to adults who maybe are more like them or have ambitions more like theirs than their own parents have. So the idea of multiple adults, not just one parent or two parents, not just a teacher in a classroom, but a number of adults. At Sudbury Valley, it's 10 adults who have different abilities, different personalities. The kids know who's good at this, who's good at that, who has a lap to sit on, who's going to be harsher and not so comforting. You go to who can fill your need, but it's your choice. It's not the adult's choice. And that's true at Sudbury Valley. It's true at a hunter-gatherer band. I already talked about the importance of free age mixing among children and adolescents. That's really, really key. Children play, when it occurs in an age mixed setting, is qualitatively different. It's far more nurturing, it's far more caring, it's less competitive than play when everybody's the same age. So, and much of my own research has that, and I give a couple of articles on the back of this that I've published on that topic. And then the sixth, immersion in a stable, moral, democratic community. This is not Lord of the Flies. This is kids, this is kids in a stable, moral, democratic community where there are adults as well as kids, where there are traditions, where there are rules and laws that are developed, but they're developed democratically, so that the kids feel that they have a voice in making that, and they really do have a voice in making it. This is a community that they are truly part of. It's not something done to them the way school is. This is something that they are an integral part of. So they are growing up with a sense of responsibility, not just to themselves, because that wouldn't really be enough, but also with a sense of responsibility to the band or to the school and to the network of bands that the band is associated with, so that you feel that your actions are not just for you. They are also for the group that you are an integral part of. And it's important that it be a moral community, because where do morals come from? Children through play are not necessarily going to acquire the morals that we value in our culture unless they are steeped in a community that represents those morals. If it's the kind of community that Kevin was describing of adults bullying, they are acquiring the morality of authority and bullying, and you win by being strong and powerful. If they're growing up in a hunter-gatherer band, they're acquiring the morality of egalitarianism. If they're growing up in Sudbury Valley School, they're acquiring the morality of American democracy and all that implies and stands for. Now, I want to make the point that not only do these characteristics apply to both the hunter-gatherer band and Sudbury Valley School, but every one of them is the opposite of what you find in our standard schools. Every single one of them. There's a deliberate deprivation of the opportunities for self-directed learning in our public schools, because in order to get kids to focus on what the adults want to teach them, you have to take away all of the opportunities that they could have to educate themselves. So you take away the opportunity to play. You take away the opportunity to really play with the tools of the class. You take away the age mix environment, put everybody the same age, so that the only other kids are the ones you have the least to learn from, who are most like you. So you have to learn from the one age different person in the room who's an adult, and who is not really modeling what it is like to be an adult, other than modeling what it is like to be a teacher in that classroom. So certainly you're not immersed in a stable, moral, democratic community. Certainly, not only is it not moral, as Kevin pointed out so well in his talk, and it's certainly not democratic, but it's also not stable, because every year you go to an entirely different classroom, entirely different group of kids. You know, you're only there transitorily. You can't really identify with this as your community. All right, let me just, the last part of my talk, and there's not really, I want to bring it to a close. I was going to talk a little bit about how children learn through play. And let me just be very, very brief. My argument here is that children learn physical skills, they learn intellectual skills, they learn social and moral development occurs through play, and emotional development occurs through play. I could talk about how the playful state of mind, if this were another talk, I would focus entirely on this, how the playful state of mind has been shown in many, many psychological experiments to be the ideal state of mind for new learning, for creativity, for insightful problem solving. There are many, many experiments in which basically what you do is you put one group of people in the state of mind where they know they're being evaluated, and this is not a playful state of mind, where the outcome is important. The other group is in this state of mind where they're just doing this for fun, nobody's going to look at it, and some of these are tests of learning new material, learning new skills. Some of them are tests of creativity, creating a creative collage or a poem or a short story. Some of them are tests of insightful problem solving. You give them a problem of the kind that the answer isn't easy to see. You have to kind of see things in a different way from the way you usually look at things. In all of these experiments, the people in the playful state of mind, most of these are done with college students, do far better. It's not just statistically significantly better, it's far better than the group that is in the judged situation. And yet in our schools, we're putting kids precisely in the situation where we think they're supposed to be learning new stuff, being creative, being insightful, and so forth. We are depriving them of the playful state of mind, and we're putting them in this judged state of mind, which is the judged state of mind is the best state of mind to be in if you already know how to do something. It's a purely routine thing, and all you're doing is showing off how well you know how to do it. Then when you're being evaluated, you put more effort into it. But you can't be a better learner just by putting more effort into it. You can't be more creative just by trying really hard to be creative. You can't solve an insight problem just by being terribly motivated to solve that insight problem. It's the stepping back. It's the allowing of the looseness of the mind, the allowing of more free association, allowing you to think from a fantasy point of view. That's what allows children and adults to solve these kinds of problems, learn new things in the playful state of mind and not in the judged state of mind. The school situation, people talk about the education gap, which grows every year, grows larger. Those who start off behind fall farther and farther behind. Those who start off ahead go farther and farther ahead. The judged condition is precisely that kind of condition that exaggerates the difference between those who already know and for whom the school situation is motivating because it allows them to show off, and those who don't know and the school situation is anxiety provoking, and it presents these conditions that make it very, very difficult to learn or be creative. Play and social development. Let me just say a word about that because it's so important. Children are extraordinarily motivated to play with other children. The key freedom in play is freedom to quit. If you aren't free to quit, it's not play. Now, that freedom to quit is the key to the social value of play. This is something that people who design play for kids and then try to make them do it don't understand. You've got to be able to quit. Otherwise, it's not play. And let's assume, and kids really want to play. So let's assume you and I are playmates. And let's assume I want to play this. But you don't want to play that. And you're just going to quit and walk away. But I don't want you to walk away. So we have to talk about it. We have to figure it out. Okay, I want to play this, you want to play that. Maybe we can play this thing that's sort of in between. We disagree about the rules. We negotiate the rules. At some point, maybe I start to bully you, or I start to lord it over you in one way or another. If I do that, you're going to quit. The power of the other person, the power of keeping the play going, is what makes me have to see things from your point of view. What makes me have to realize that I can't bully. Social play is the most democratic activity there is because everybody's free to quit. If you're not free to quit, bullying is possible. If you're free to quit, bullying is not possible because if anybody who feels bullied can just walk away. As long as schools are compulsory, bullying will always occur there. It's only when people can walk away from it and say, I'm not going to associate with you if you're going to behave to me that way. So I just wanted to make that point about, now play and emotional development. There is one of the leading theories about animal play is the emotion regulation theory of play. If you watch young mammals play, one of the things they are constantly doing is playing dangerously. They're playing, you know, young goat kids are romping around on cliffs, and they are leaping up in ways that make it difficult for them to land. Monkeys are swinging around playfully, chasing one another around in trees where they can just barely make it from branch to branch, and they're high enough up that they could actually hurt themselves a little bit if they fell. Children play the same way. They climb trees too high, they swing too high, they skateboard down banisters that make parents nervous, and so on and so forth. Why do they do that? According to the emotion regulation theory, they are learning how to deal with fear. They are testing their ability to deal with fear. Extraordinarily important ability to develop, because throughout life we are going to be faced with fearful situations, and we better know how to deal with fear, or else we will have a panic attack, or else we will become incapacitated by it. So they're constantly, and they're also, in their rough and tumble play, they're getting themselves angry a little bit. So they're learning how to deal with anger, because you have to deal with that too to get along with people. You have to learn how to control your anger. There are play deprivation experiments with rats and mice. There are ways of raising young rats. There are also ways of raising young monkeys in such a way that they have other social experiences but not play. When you test them as young adults and you put them in a novel situation that would be moderately frightening to a normally raised animal, it becomes terrifying to this animal. The animal can't deal with it. The animal just freezes in the corner and defecates and doesn't adapt to it. When you put this animal in contact with a peer, another animal, a strange animal of its own age and species, it lashes out inappropriately, alternates between that and acting terribly frightened. Doesn't know how to deal with these stressful situations. It's interesting, and one of the things I document in the book is that over the last 50 years, as school has become an increasingly powerful force and more time-consuming force in our society, and as the school mentality has seeped out of the school walls so that children are more and more under adult control and less out playing in gangs of other kids, neighborhood age-mixed kids. This has been a continuous trend from about 1950 till today. There's been a continuous, well-documented decline in children's freedom to play independently of adults. Over this same period of time, there has been, and this isn't just that we're identifying it where we didn't identify it before, this is well documented by clinical questionnaires such as the MMPI, the Taylor's Manifest Anxiety Scale. There has been a continuous and over time dramatic increase in all kinds of mental disorders among children. The rate, using exact same measures on these questionnaires, the rate of clinically significant anxiety disorder among children today is 5 to 8 times what it was in the 1950s. Similar for the rate of clinically diagnosable depression. Suicide rate among children aged 15 and under is now 4 times what it was in the 1950s. All of these have been a linear trend over time that is exactly perpendicular to the decline in free play. And in my book, I make the case for a cause-effect relationship. Of course, correlation by itself doesn't prove it, but it fits with the animal experiments. We have been doing a play deprivation experiment with our children over the last 50 years. We've been seeing what happens. We deprive them more and more of play. And the consequences are exactly what happens with those rats and mice when they're deprived of play. They do not learn how to solve their own problems. They do not learn how to deal with anxiety, with fearful situations and with anger. And so they have mental breakdowns. They have mental disorders, which we treat with drugs, rather than by trying to systematically understand what it is that's causing these things to happen in the first place. Well, I've gone over my time, so I'm going to bring it to a close at this. Okay, what I'd like to do is maybe take 5 minutes for questions with Peter, if we might. And you'll be happy to know that listening to the last 3 speakers, I've rewritten my talk 4 times. And I have since decided that this is not really meant to be an endurance contest on your part. So I'm just going to speak for a very few minutes and then open it up to questions. Because I think if you're more actively participating, you'll be more likely to participate and be active and stay awake off your laptop or whatever.
So let's do 5 minutes of Peter, and then I'm going to ask, actually, rather than take one of our breaks, if you'll, unless you have to go to the bathroom, if you'll just stand and think about it a little bit, talk to your neighbor, and then 3 minutes later we'll sit down, and we will formally adjourn right at 2. But we have the room until 2:30, so we can continue to do questions and answers for the last half hour.
Peter,
Okay, yeah.
a couple of people asked that we announced that if you want to talk about learning centers, that they would like to meet, like just to exchange cards and stuff. So
Okay, we can do that. We've got the 2 to 2:30 time span to do that as well.
Actually, I was more talking about simply being able to state who we are, so that, you know, we know.
Okay, we'll take the first 5 minutes after 2. Go, Peter.
Yes.
Thank you for your talk. You make the claim that they have unlimited freedom to play and explore their own interests. I was curious if that was not just a temporal unlimitation, but if it was also a geographical, like how far
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah.
they go, and how, and this might not be able to be answered, but how could that translate to contemporary Main Street USA?
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, there are two issues here. One is specifically at the Sudbury Valley School. I have to say that over time, as the culture has become more and more litigious, and as children are questioned if they're seen out on the street or in the woods, and the school is in serious threat of you know, the same thing that was once regarded as normative is now regarded as abusive, to let your child be out there without an adult watching them. So the school, for its own survival, has had to become more careful about that. The school grounds are 10 acres. There's a pond. It's adjacent to a state park that's forested. The kids can still go there, but now they have to sign out if they're under a certain age, and they have to go with somebody. Just because there have been cases of a couple of little girls out there playing by themselves and somebody coming along and reporting it to the authorities. You know, this is the kind of culture we've become. When I was 5 years old, I could go any place. Now, an 8-year-old can't go any place. You know, and some people don't allow their 13-year-olds to go any place. You know, we're that kind of a world. So that's unfortunate. I mean, my talks are on two fronts. One are about education. The other is trying to create safe places for kids to play away from children, where adults with today's mentality don't feel like they have to be there watching their kids playing, because the kids need to get away from the parents, and they need to get away from other adults in order to experience these values of play.
Just a quick, in the hunter-gatherer culture,
Right.
was there a geographical limitation there? I mean, little boy wanted to get eaten by a bull.
I mean, what is quite remarkable is by the time kids can go off, they also have appropriate levels of fear and caution. A little kid at Sudbury Valley or in a hunter-gatherer culture doesn't go off by himself. He stays around other kids. He's afraid to, quite properly afraid to go off by himself. And so I think that when kids are completely restricted, then they want to test that restriction. And then they may actually do something dangerous. But when kids know it's really, and of course you give them proper warnings. I'm sure hunter-gatherer adults warn their kids about the lions and tigers out there. And also I should say that hunter-gatherers, there are certain things that they protect their kids from. I said they allow them to play with knives and fire, but the poison-tipped arrows are kept way up in a tree where only the older kids could get them, and the older kids all understand the dangers. So, yeah.
So my question is, in today's world, does this freedom to play only work effectively in isolation? And what I mean by that is, like a Sudbury Valley School. So I have a village of homeschoolers, and we very much have this democracy, freedom play, moms heading out, people are ranging. We go to a playground, 22 families show up with kids ranging from newborns to 14-year-olds. They stampede the playground. We call it the Moms Club syndrome, and all the moms go, they pull their babies tight, and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe we're here. And the 14-year-olds, they're like, oh, we're fine, like we'll push our kid for you, and they're like scared of our children.
Yeah, right.
They're like, I can't believe your kids are so abrasive. And we're like, they just offered to push your kid on the swing, like.
Right.
So,
Right.
You know, does it actually only work if it's in someone's backyard or in a Sudbury Valley 10-acre location, or a state park rented it?
Yeah, yeah. There's a book that I recommend. He and I have given a talk together. Mike Lanza wrote a book called Playborhood, which is exactly on this problem of how is it in our culture that we can create the opportunities for children to play? How can we convince adults that it's safe for their children to play? You know, that's a whole different talk, but that's a problem that we have to solve as a society. I think there's a lot of different things that have happened between the 1950s and now, which have led to this difference. It's a whole set of things, which I talk about, 5 or 6 different social forces that have tended to create this. But it is just remarkable. I believe, I've said this many times and I've never found it, if somebody can challenge us to do it, I believe there has never been a time or place in the entire history of the world where children were thought of as so unable, so incapable as our culture today. There were times where children were treated worse in sweatshops, but that wasn't an issue of underestimating their abilities. That was an issue of abusing them. But no time or place have people had such low estimation of children's abilities. We even see there's a whole issue of a new journal that in psychology dealing with the teenage brain, you know, how the teenage brain, we go through this, you know, at one point it was the African brain, you know, and then it was the woman's brain, and now it's the teenage brain. It becomes our neural justification for believing that a certain class of people are incompetent. Mike Lanza, L-A-N-Z-A. It's called Playborhood. He also has an active website. But that's a very useful book. He talks about his own strategy in a middle-class neighborhood, but he also gives 7 other examples, including in inner-city areas, where basically adults have gotten together, realized there's a problem here, our kids are not free to play, let's solve that problem, and gives different ways that different groups have solved that problem. Well, yeah.
We'll do one more.
Okay. I was just going to mention that, you know, we so want to protect our children that the very language that we use around children is very prohibitive. It's
right.
Don't fall. You know, it's
right.
not positive language that encourages them to evaluate a risk and to take a risk and provide that safe environment. So when somebody goes to the playground and they see somebody running up to their child, they assume they're going to knock the kid down.
Right.
We don't even have a language. So I think a lot of it has to be changing our language into a more positive language. And when we're facilitating learning, we're not going to teach, but we're going to facilitate.
But I think even more than that, our job is to stay awake. Right.
All right. Thank you. So let's take our literally standing